your budget request. You requested a 4% increase, and a couple of counts stood out. There's a request for $3.4 billion for Treasury International Programs, which was a 58% increase over FY11. And then food security accounts was a 1,027% request in your budget. And debt relief was a 336% increase in your budget. Can you review quickly?
Absolutely. Usually I testify separately on the international piece of our budget. The Treasury piece of what's called the foreign assistance budget is about 5% of the total foreign assistance budget. And our piece, the piece we're responsible for, is for funding the institutions like the World Bank, the international financial institutions. And in those institutions, we get enormous leverage for every dollar of taxpayer resources. And the specific requests you referred to include a variety of commitments that the government of the United States has made in the past under Republican and Democratic administrations, and instead of new commitments targeted in areas where we think there's the highest return to our basic national security and economic interests. I'll give you an example. In food security, what we propose to do is to help seed a multilateral fund to help support improvements in agricultural productivity and investment in developing countries because, of course, the enormous challenges of poverty in those countries. But that's also an example where there's a very high return to American technology, American innovation, because we're the most productive farmers in the world in that case. But across, and I'd be happy to talk in more detail to you and your staff about that, but it's worth noting we're 5% of the foreign assistance budget, but our resources in that 5% leverage multiple dollars, both by bringing other people to the table and borrowing, and so the total resources that 5% supports is more than 1.5 times the entire 150 account budget. So as we figure out how we reduce spending and reduce our deficits, and we're going to have to reduce spending, we want to make sure we're preserving things where we have the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest improvement, the biggest return on the marginal dollar of taxpayer resources, and that's what our request provides.
I'm worried we have appropriated money that apparently is going directly to the Islamic Republic of Iran under your administration, meaning that Treasury Department manages our relationship with the IBRD, IFC, and MIGA. IBRD has a $344 million unexpended balance to Iran since we own 16.8% of the bank. That's $58 million US dollars that would be provided to Iran. IFC, $17 million since we own 24%. That's $4 million US dollars from the taxpayer. MIGA going to provide $127 million to Iran. We own 18.5% of that. It's a total of $85 million direct from the US taxpayer. And I understand these payments are made directly to the finance ministry of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Is that about right?
Senator, you and I are in the same exact place on this. We oppose lending by the World Bank and its entities to Iran. We've opposed them for a long period of time. The last loans that were approved by the World Bank Board were approved in 2005.
I guess what I'm talking about is you haven't cut these checks yet, but you're about to.
Well, I'm not sure which checks you're referring to. Again,
these are 2005 loans.
Yeah, 2005 loans. That's the last time the World Bank approved a loan. We opposed that loan then.
No, but what I'm
fought
saying
against it over that period of time, and of course, as you know, are working very, very hard to dramatically tighten the financial sanctions on Iran now with substantial success.
Let me just say, you do not have substantial success. I have written you a classified annex, and I hope you read it before you testify again on this subject. I hope you read that very carefully.
Of course, I would. Again, I'd be happy. I know that you care a lot about these issues as we do, and I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail about it. But I will say again that the financial sanctions programs that my colleagues have helped us design in cooperation with that security community have resulted in a dramatic, incredibly powerful tightening of the basic economic sanctions on the government of Iran. Very important we do that. We will continue to look for ways to tighten it further.
Before you testify before Congress again and make a statement like that, I would absolutely urge you to review the record.
Again, and we're happy to work with you and your colleagues on ways to go further. And we, of course, this job requires a relentless focus, because when we tighten something here, what happens is over time, unless you stay on it, the stuff will shift gradually. People get around it, so it requires relentless focus. Happy to talk to you in more detail about it.
In March, the U.S. government raised a net of $128 billion, and it spent a net of $1.05 trillion. meaning your spending to raising ratio was you spent $8 for every $1 that you raised. You covered it by borrowing $786 billion and reducing your cash balance, $72 billion, to an ending balance for the U.S. government of $118 billion in the bank. Is that your estimate of how your march went?
Well, I'd have to check those numbers, but keep going. Go ahead. I'll be happy to.
So Erskine Bowles yesterday testified before the House that we are facing the most predictable economic crisis in history. Would you agree with him?
I agree that our long-term fiscal challenges are an important imperative for the country to solve, as I said before in response to Senator Moran's questions. And I agree it's very important we do it. Of course, we have lots of other challenges too, and our challenge is to do that in a way that doesn't hurt the recovery, hurt the economy, hurt our long-term strength and competitiveness.
Last question. If you were the Chinese, would you lend us another $1 trillion?
Of course, and of course, because, and let me just repeat something I said before, the world still views the United States and the American political system as up to the challenge of delivering reforms that make our economy stronger and our fiscal position more sustainable. If you look at what we pay to borrow today, there's still enormous confidence around the world in the capacity of this political system, people in Washington coming together and solving these problems, because we've always done it in the past. But we have to earn that confidence every day, and that's why these efforts underway, including the ones that Senator Durbin was part of in the Fiscal Commission, are so important. And it's important, again, that Congress find a way to come together and lock in comprehensive restraints that reduce those long-term deficits. It's completely within our capacity to do, and we have to make sure we justify that confidence that you see in markets every day now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.